AITAH for telling my mother-in-law that my husband is spending Thanksgiving with his new family? I never imagined my life would be a tug-of-war between family and boundaries. But here I am, 31 years old, married to my husband Elliot, with a baby due any day now. And yet somehow, the pull of other people's expectations still haunts every decision we make. Growing up, I thought that building a family of my own would bring a sense of peace and security. A way to close the door on outside pressures. I thought it would feel simple. Something that would naturally fall into place. But if anything, it's only magnified the unspoken weight of family expectations. Especially with Elliot's parents. Elliot and I share a similar background. We grew up in the same small hometown. Which, I thought, made everything easier at first. Our shared roots gave us a sense of belonging. A foundation to build on. But while my parents embraced our marriage and supported our move across the country, his parents saw it as the start of something they could never quite accept. They saw our move as a betrayal, more specifically, as Elliot betraying them for me. I'd been accepted to my dream graduate program in a city across the country. A place that happened to be a perfect fit for Elliot's career as well. But his parents saw only one thing: their son leaving. And, in their eyes, leaving meant abandoning them. They made no effort to hide their disapproval, reminding Elliot at every opportunity of what he was giving up. "You're leaving your roots," they would say, or, "You're turning your back on your family," as if he had chosen some sort of exile rather than a life with me. Even the suggestion that our move was beneficial for his career fell on deaf ears. To them, it was simply my decision, my plan that was dragging him away. I could sense the resentment. A slow-burning disapproval simmering beneath the surface. Especially from my mother-in-law, who saw me not as a partner for her son but as the woman who had taken him away. Elliot, to his credit, stood by me through all of it. He handled his parents' disapproval with a calm resolve that, in the beginning, surprised me. When I voiced concerns about the strain our move might cause with his family, he assured me that he wanted to be with me, that the life we were building was worth any tension it caused. He saw a future with me in this new city, and as far as he was concerned, we were doing what was best for our family. We both fell in love with the city. I graduated, and we decided to make it our home. We built lives, friendships, and careers here, and for once, it felt like we were creating something that was truly ours. Over time, his parents' disapproval simmered down, but I could always sense it lying in wait, surfacing around holidays and family gatherings. It was as if every trip home was a reminder of the life they thought he should have chosen. A life closer to them. I could feel it in the loaded comments. The strained smiles. The way his mother would touch his arm and sigh, as if she were still trying to lure him back. They'd grown more subtle about it. But their disapproval had never fully gone away. And though I did my best to be understanding, there was a part of me that resented the ever-present reminder that I was seen as the outsider, the person who had disrupted what they thought their family should look like. For years, we made the trips back home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, putting aside our own plans to join his family and mine in holiday traditions. I thought those efforts might finally earn me a place in their family. That I could show them my love for Elliot was genuine. That I was committed to our life together. But no matter how many holidays we spent shuttling between houses or how many hours we spent in airports, I never felt like I fully belonged. It was as if they were just waiting, holding out hope that, one day, he'd come to his senses and return home for good. And now, this year, everything feels different. My daughter is due the week after Thanksgiving, and with that impending arrival, a clarity has settled over me. There's no way I'm traveling. No way I'm spending these final, precious days anywhere but here, preparing to welcome our baby into the world. Elliot agreed without a second thought. And we planned to spend a quiet Thanksgiving together. Just the two of us. It felt like a well-earned pause. A small rebellion against years of outside expectations. For once, it was just about us, our own family, our own needs. Still, as Thanksgiving approaches, I feel a strange tension building. A sense that breaking from tradition may not be as simple as we hoped. A small part of me wonders if this decision to stay home will reopen old wounds. If it will somehow bring back the lingering resentment his parents have held for years. The idea of missing Thanksgiving, of choosing our home over theirs, seems to feel like a final, unspoken boundary. And yet, as I sit here, feeling my daughter kick within me, I know this is where we're supposed to be. Thanksgiving has always been a chaotic whirlwind, a tug of war that Elliot and I would navigate between our families. Cross-country flights, and tight schedules, we had developed a kind of rhythm to it, an unspoken understanding that no matter how exhausted we were, we would make the trip home for both Thanksgiving and Christmas, because that's what was expected. But this year, with my due date looming only days after Thanksgiving, there was simply no option but to stay put. It wasn't safe for me to travel, and I had no desire to be anywhere other than the familiar comfort of our home, surrounded by things we had carefully set up in preparation for our baby. It felt like a relief, finally having a reason we couldn't ignore or argue around. This time, it wasn't about meeting anyone's expectations but rather about safety and sanity. Elliot had agreed without hesitation, understanding the risks and, just as importantly, understanding my need for a peaceful, grounded holiday at home. For once, we wouldn't be shuttling between gatherings, listening to subtle digs about living so far away, or watching our plans strain under the pressure of trying to please everyone. I could already picture it, a quiet Thanksgiving morning, just the two of us, maybe watching the parade on TV and preparing a simple dinner together. No big, elaborate meal, just a cozy day spent relaxing in our home, anticipating the arrival of our daughter. The simplicity of it, the promise of peace, felt almost luxurious after years of exhausting holiday travel. The idea of celebrating our own family, of sharing this last holiday together as just the two of us, was something I'd come to cherish. But as much as I was looking forward to this small reprieve, I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be without consequences. There was no way Elliot's parents would let it go without at least some disappointment. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas had been an obligation we had honored since we got married. An unspoken agreement that our plans would be set aside so we could return home. It was a silent contract that always left me with the impression that, despite building our life together, we were still tethered to their idea of family. When Elliot had told his parents about our plan to stay home, his mother's disappointment was palpable, though she'd kept her voice steady, slipping in only a small, "Well, it's sad we won't see you." But I could hear the weight of it, the way her words lingered in the air, unspoken accusations that I was somehow behind his decision. I knew she couldn't fully understand our need to stay home, and perhaps even saw it as an act of selfishness on my part. The culmination of her long-held fear that I was taking him away. Elliot brushed it off when he told me, downplaying it as just the usual, a small ripple that would settle once they accepted our decision. I appreciated his calm, his confidence that we didn't owe anyone an explanation. But still, I sensed that this was more than just a one-time disappointment for his parents. It was as if, by staying home, we were finally drawing a line they couldn't ignore. And a small part of me worried that this quiet boundary, this decision to make a choice purely for ourselves, might open a wound in our relationship with them that we could never fully mend. But despite these doubts, I held on to the excitement of the holiday we'd planned. For the first time, Thanksgiving wouldn't be about anyone's expectations but our own. We'd stay in our own space, surrounded by the little preparations we'd made for the baby, her crib tucked into the corner of our room, her tiny clothes neatly folded and ready, the soft blankets we'd bought to wrap her in warmth and safety. This year, it would be just us and the anticipation of the family we were about to become. And so, with Thanksgiving drawing closer, I tried to push aside the lingering feelings of guilt and focus on the positive. This holiday would be a beginning, a chance to honor the family we were creating without the weight of anyone else's expectations. Just as I'd begun to settle into the idea of a quiet Thanksgiving, I received a phone call that yanked me right back into the familiar tension with Elliot's family. It was my mother-in-law, her voice carrying an upbeat, slightly strained quality, the kind she used when she wanted something but wasn't sure how it would be received. She began with small talk, asking about the baby, how I was feeling, if we were ready for the big day. I answered politely, feeling a vague unease growing in the back of my mind. Her tone was friendly, but there was something else there too, an edge that suggested she wasn't calling simply to check in. And sure enough, after a few more pleasantries, she came out with it. "I was talking to Elliot earlier this week," she said, her voice light but unmistakably loaded. "I was just asking him when he planned to fly home for Thanksgiving. And he said, well, he said you both were staying there." The words hung in the air between us. I was momentarily speechless, caught off guard by the question and by the way she had phrased it, as if the decision for Elliot to stay had come solely from me. As if he had simply relayed my command. I tried to compose myself, brushing off the irritation rising in my chest, and responded, explaining again that it wasn't safe for me to travel with my due date so close. I assumed that would be the end of it, a simple reiteration of what we had already discussed. But my mother-in-law persisted, her tone growing sharper. She explained that she had suggested Elliot come home alone, that he could just fly out for a few days to spend time with his family before the baby arrived. She pointed out that I'd still have a week to go and that he could be back well before the due date. "You'll have him back in plenty of time," she added, as though a quick trip across the country was no big deal. Even though our daughter could decide to arrive early. Listening to her, I felt my stomach twist. The very idea that she'd suggested he leave me alone during my final week of pregnancy, a time filled with both excitement and nerves, left me stunned. I had envisioned this last week together as a quiet, special time, one in which we'd prepare and anticipate the arrival of our baby. The thought of spending it alone, knowing he was states away, felt incredibly isolating. Then, another piece of her story settled in, and a new frustration hit me. Elliot hadn't mentioned any of this to me. I could understand why he hadn't wanted to bring it up, likely because he wanted to spare me from any extra stress. He'd always been considerate that way, shielding me from unnecessary drama whenever possible. But still, it left me with a strange feeling, almost as though this conversation had been a decision between him and his mother that hadn't included me. Even if Elliot had ultimately refused her request, I realized my mother-in-law was still talking, going on about how much they missed him, how the holidays were meant for family time, and how Thanksgiving was their chance to be together. She kept insisting that since I see him all the time, I could manage a few days without him. I couldn't believe how easily she disregarded my pregnancy and our need to be together for what might be our last quiet holiday for a long time. In her mind, her desire to see her son was more important than what I needed during this time. Finally, I interrupted her. I told her, as kindly as I could, that while I wanted Elliot to have time with his family, I also needed my husband with me. I explained that the last stage of pregnancy wasn't exactly something I felt comfortable handling on my own. I added that I wanted him by my side for Thanksgiving, and more than that, I wanted his support as we prepared for our baby's arrival. But my words seemed to go unheard. My mother-in-law continued as though she hadn't heard me, saying that Elliot belonged with his family for Thanksgiving, that I needed to understand what the holidays meant to them. Her voice grew sharper, edged with frustration as she subtly reminded me that I'd been the one to initiate the move. And therefore, I had to accept that Elliot would need to spend some holidays away without me, to keep connected with his roots. Her words cut deeply, a reminder of the resentment she still felt for the distance between us. The choice we'd made together that she still seemed to hold against me alone. I felt trapped, unable to make her understand that it wasn't about pulling him away from his family but about building our own. I couldn't deny the sting of her words, the implication that I had somehow taken him from them, that my needs were just obstacles standing in the way of what she wanted. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts before responding. "I understand how important family is to you," I began, choosing my words carefully. "That's why I offered to have you come here, so we could all be together." I hesitated, then added, "But I also think that part of family means supporting each other's new stages in life. Elliot and I are building our own family now, and with our daughter due so soon, I need him here." I could feel the tension grow as my words sank in, but I decided to push forward, driven by a surge of frustration and a need to protect the life we were building. "I think it's wonderful that you raised a son who values family so much," I said, feeling my voice tremble slightly. But I also think it's a testament to that value that he wants to be with his wife and child. Especially now. That was when I made the comment I knew would land hardest. I mentioned that Elliot and I were his new family now. A statement that felt so obvious to me but hit her like a slap. She immediately bristled, her voice rising in sharp, indignant tones. She accused me of being selfish, possessive, and of doing exactly what she had always feared, that I would pull him away. Remove him from the family he had grown up with, and turn him into a stranger to his own roots. The accusation hurt, not because I thought it was true but because I could feel the depth of her belief in it. She saw me as an outsider, someone who had come in and disrupted what she believed their family should look like. And as much as I tried to explain, to reassure her that this was simply part of life, part of Elliot's journey as a husband and father, she refused to listen. To her, I was still the person who had taken her son away. Feeling the strain of the conversation, I told her that if she had an issue with Elliot's choice, she should take it up with him. There was no way to continue without hurting us both. So I excused myself and ended the call. The silence afterward was deafening. A stark reminder of the deep rift between us that I wasn't sure would ever heal. As I sat there, absorbing the weight of her words, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, guilt, frustration, but also a quiet resolve. I knew that Elliot and I were making the right decision, even if his mother couldn't see it. This was our life, our family, and while I wished she could understand, I also knew that I had to hold my ground. I spent most of the afternoon stewing over the conversation with my mother-in-law, replaying each word in my mind. Part of me wondered if I'd said the wrong thing, if calling us Elliot's new family had somehow crossed an invisible line. But no matter how many ways I tried to look at it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was right. We were his family now. And that reality was something she simply refused to accept. It was exhausting, feeling as though every decision I made for our family was somehow undermined by the weight of her expectations. Just as I was beginning to calm down, my phone rang again. Seeing my mother-in-law's name on the screen made my stomach twist. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but some part of me wanted to stand firm, to defend the decision Elliot and I had made together. I took a deep breath and answered, bracing myself. Right away, she launched into the conversation, picking up as though we hadn't ended on tense terms earlier. Her tone was sharp, her words pointed as she argued that Elliot deserved to be with his family for Thanksgiving. That it wasn't fair for me to expect him to spend every holiday away from them. She kept hammering on the idea that I had taken him away, framing his absence as a burden I had placed on them, a price they had to pay for our life together. The holidays are meant for family, she kept saying, as if that truth alone should overrule any other need, as if I somehow didn't understand the concept of family. I felt my patience thinning, my frustration growing with every sentence. I'd already told her I wanted Elliot by my side, that it wasn't about keeping him from his family but about having him with me during a vulnerable time. But it was like she couldn't hear me. Like every reason I gave was drowned out by her own belief that her claim to him superseded mine. She continued, saying that since I see him all the time, it was selfish to expect him to stay with me for Thanksgiving. Especially when it was his duty to spend the holidays with his family. Her insistence felt surreal. I was nearing the end of my pregnancy, just days away from our due date. Yet she spoke as though my concerns were trivial, as though my need for my husband's support during this time was somehow petty. There was a small, spiteful part of me that wanted to ask if she had ever gone through this herself. If she had ever known what it felt like to need her partner's support as she prepared to bring a child into the world. But I held back, not wanting to turn this into an even bigger argument. I could feel my chest tightening with the weight of her words, each one making me feel as if I were being unreasonable, as if I were somehow at fault. I finally interrupted, my voice strained but steady. We've already invited you to come here, I reminded her, forcing myself to stay calm. You'd be more than welcome to spend Thanksgiving with us. Elliot and I would love to have you, and we could celebrate together. It was an olive branch, a genuine offer. Even though I knew she'd likely never take it, I had hoped it would be enough to show her that I wasn't trying to pull Elliot away from his family. That I wanted to bridge the distance between us. even if it meant opening our home during a time when I needed rest and peace. But my suggestion was brushed aside. She barely acknowledged it, dismissing the idea as if it were an inconvenience, not even pausing to consider what it would mean for us to host her. She was fixated on the idea that Elliot should fly home alone. Without me. It's different, she insisted. He's supposed to come home. Back to where he belongs. Especially during the holidays. Her words stung. A harsh reminder that, to her, I would always be the outsider. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, and a deep, aching sense of exhaustion. She went on, saying that I needed to accept that there would be times Elliot wouldn't be with me on the holidays. As if this were some natural part of our lives together. As if our family's needs would always take a backseat to theirs. She made it clear, in no uncertain terms, that she expected him to prioritize them. That his connection to them should always come first. I felt something snap inside me. I'd spent years trying to be understanding, accommodating, bending over backward to bridge the gap between us. But this constant tug of war, this endless cycle of demands and expectations, had worn me down to the point where I couldn't stay silent any longer. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself and spoke. I understand how important family is to you, I said, my voice firm, but Elliot and I are his family now. We're about to have a baby together. And that means we need to make choices that reflect the family we're building. I felt a wave of relief saying it out loud. A small but meaningful boundary that felt long overdue. But my words only seemed to fuel her anger. She launched into a tirade. Her tone thick with frustration as she accused me of doing exactly what she had always feared. She said that her greatest worry, from the moment Elliot and I got married, was that I would take him away from his family. That I would drive a wedge between him and his roots. She made it sound as though I were deliberately tearing him from their lives. A selfish influence who had set out to claim him as my own. Disregarding everyone else. Her accusations felt like a slap. Even though I'd expected them. She painted me as selfish, possessive, and manipulative, all because I wanted my husband by my side as we prepared to welcome our daughter. I could feel my face flush with anger. 100 responses flying through my mind. Each one sharper than the last. But instead of lashing out, I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. In as calm a tone as I could manage, I told her that this was Elliot's choice as much as it was mine. He wants to be here for me and for our daughter, I said, my voice unwavering. And that doesn't mean he's abandoning you or forgetting where he came from. It means he's committed to his family, our family. And right now, that means staying home. Her silence was deafening. I could feel the tension simmering on the other end of the line. The weight of her disapproval settling between us. She didn't respond right away. But I could sense the frustration. The sense of loss she felt over a son who was no longer hers alone. Finally, she muttered something about how she just wanted to see her son, and how I was making it impossible. It felt like a final jab. A last attempt to make me feel guilty. To make me question the boundaries I was setting. With that, I told her it would be best if she took her concerns up with Elliot. Then ended the call. I sat there in the silence afterward. My heart pounding as I absorbed the weight of everything that had just been said. Part of me felt relieved. Proud even, for finally standing my ground. But another part of me felt heavy. Burdened by the knowledge that my words had likely deepened the rift between us. I hadn't set out to hurt her. But I knew that, in her eyes, I had crossed a line that could never be undone. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my mind. The way she had accused me of pulling him away, of destroying the bond they shared. It felt like a blow. A reminder that no matter what I did, I would always be seen as the reason for the distance between them. But as I thought about it, a quiet resolve settled over me. I knew that Elliot wanted to be with me. That he had chosen this life with me. Just as much as I had chosen it with him. This was our family, our home, and though it hurt to be misunderstood, I knew I had done what was right for us. The hours after my conversation with my mother-in-law felt like a blur of mixed emotions. I tried to distract myself, moving from one small task to another. But her words lingered in my mind, replaying like a loop I couldn't shut off. Each time I replayed them, the emotions shifted, from frustration to sadness to a nagging guilt that crept up despite my best efforts to ignore it. By the time Elliot got home that evening, I'd settled into a numb sort of exhaustion. He walked in with his usual warmth, greeting me with a smile and gentle hug. And for a moment, I just melted into him, grateful for his familiar presence. I hadn't planned to tell him about the call right away. Part of me wanted to shield him from the stress, especially knowing how he felt about his family's reactions over the years. But when he pulled back, noticing my silence, he could tell immediately that something was off. Without hesitation, he asked, "Is everything okay?" There was genuine concern in his eyes, the kind of worry that only comes from knowing someone deeply. And in that moment, I felt a surge of relief, a reminder that I wasn't in this alone. I took a breath and told him about the conversation, explaining everything from his mother's insistence that he should fly home alone to her reaction to my comment about us being his new family. I could see his expression darken as he listened, his jaw tightening with each new detail. When I got to the part where she accused me of taking him away from his family, he shook his head, a spark of anger flashing in his eyes. "She had no right to say that to you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you're absolutely right. I am staying here with you. This isn't even up for discussion." His support was both comforting and, in a way, validating. I hadn't realized just how much I needed to hear him say those words, to reaffirm the choice we'd made together. But even as he spoke, I felt the weight of my own conflicted emotions. I knew Elliot was on my side, yet part of me still felt torn, wondering if I'd somehow fueled the divide between him and his family. I feel like I made things worse," I admitted, my voice wavering slightly. I didn't want to hurt her or make her feel shut out. But it's like every time we make a choice for ourselves, she sees it as an attack on her, on their family, and now, with the baby coming, it's only going to get harder. Elliot reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You didn't make things worse," he said, his tone steady. "She's always had this idea that I'd be there, that nothing would change. But life changes, and family changes, and she needs to understand that. We're about to have a daughter, and you and she are my priority now. If she can't see that, it's on her, not on you." I felt a surge of gratitude for his reassurance, but the guilt still lingered. I knew he was right, and I wanted to believe that this boundary we'd set was simply a natural part of building our own family. Yet, his mother's words had left a mark, a lingering sense that I was somehow the obstacle standing between him and the life his parents had envisioned. I felt guilty for being the one to disrupt their traditions, for being the one to pull him away from the family gatherings he'd grown up with. And the holidays only added to that guilt. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been the time we'd set aside to return home. A way to bridge the gap between our lives and theirs. A time where I thought maybe we could start to smooth over the years of tension. But this year, everything felt heightened. I'd thought the impending arrival of our daughter would bring a new sense of unity, that it might even be a chance for his family to feel included. Instead, it seemed like our choices were being interpreted as barriers, as if we were intentionally keeping them out. Elliot seemed to sense the turmoil I was feeling. He wrapped an arm around me, guiding me to the couch where we could sit, talk, and process. "Look," he said, his voice softening, "you're not the one making this difficult. You've always tried to include them, to bridge the distance, and I've seen it every step of the way. But this is their reaction, their decision to make it about something else. You're not responsible for that." I nodded, trying to absorb his words, but a part of me still felt unsettled. I know that logically," I admitted, "but it still feels like I'm the one pulling you away, especially with her saying that I'm taking you from your family. It's just hard not to feel like the bad guy." Elliot sighed, rubbing my back gently, a reassuring gesture that helped ease the knot in my stomach. "She's trying to guilt trip you. Plain and simple," he said, "and I'm sorry for that. But I also know that she's been making comments like this for years. And it's not fair. You haven't taken me from my family. I chose to be here with you. We made these decisions together, and I wouldn't change a thing." His words settled over me like a balm, soothing the raw edges of my guilt and frustration. This was what I needed to remember, the truth at the heart of everything we were building. We had chosen this life together. Had made each decision as partners. With our future in mind. And as much as I wanted his family's support, I knew that their expectations couldn't dictate how we lived. But even with that clarity, the sadness lingered. The sadness of realizing that this choice, to stay home, to prioritize our own family, had come at a cost. One that I hadn't anticipated feeling so heavily. I knew his family would be hurt. And that hurt translated into resentment directed squarely at me. And while Elliot assured me that this was just a reaction, that it would pass, I wasn't sure it would be so simple. As we sat there, quiet and reflective, I found myself wondering how things might change in the years to come. With a baby on the way, this choice to stay home felt like the beginning of a shift. A redefinition of what our holidays would look like and, by extension, a shift in our relationship with his family. I wanted to believe that they'd understand. That time would soften their reactions and that, eventually, they'd see our choice for what it was. A necessary step in building our own life. But the path to that understanding felt long and uncertain. By the time Elliot had fallen asleep that night, I was left alone with my thoughts. Replaying the conversation with his mother in my mind. The sharp edges of her words cutting in unexpected ways. But in that quiet moment, as I rested my hand on my stomach and felt our daughter's small kicks, I knew I couldn't let those words take root. I was doing what was right for our family. And that mattered more than anything. I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. One that reminded me of the purpose behind our decisions. This wasn't about hurting anyone or pushing anyone away. It was about creating a stable, loving environment for our daughter. One that reflected the life we wanted to share with her. And while that might look different from the life his mother had envisioned, it was still ours to shape. With a deep breath, I let myself sink into that sense of peace, hoping it would be enough to carry me through the coming days. I knew there would be more fallout, more conversations, but for now, I was ready to hold firm, ready to protect the life we were building, and ready to put our family, our new family, first. In the days following my conversation with my mother-in-law, I found myself replaying it over and over. The resentment in her words echoed through my mind, particularly her insistence that I was taking Elliot away from his family. Despite Elliot's unwavering support, a nagging feeling of doubt crept in, making me question whether I was somehow responsible for this divide. Thanksgiving was approaching, and the tension hung over our house like a cloud. I tried my best to focus on the preparations, but there was a heaviness in everything I did. A reminder that the holiday I had hoped would bring us peace was now tangled in family discord. Elliot noticed my quietness and asked if I wanted to talk about it. Part of me wanted to keep it inside, to shield him from the stress I was carrying. But I also knew that shutting him out would only deepen the wedge I feared his mother was trying to drive between us. One evening, as we sat down together after dinner, I finally let it out. I just keep wondering, I began, hesitantly, if I made things worse by being so firm with your mom. I feel like maybe I overstepped. Elliot's brow furrowed, and he leaned in, giving me his full attention. You didn't make anything worse, he said, his voice steady and calm. You set a boundary, a necessary one. If she feels hurt, that's her choice to interpret it that way. But that doesn't mean you're at fault. We've done everything we can to include them. And you've been nothing but patient. I nodded, wanting to believe him, but the doubt lingered. But she keeps saying I'm taking you away. And part of me worries that I actually am. I'm the reason we moved. The reason we're staying here for Thanksgiving. What if she's right? Elliot sighed, his face softening as he took my hand. We moved because we both wanted this life. Remember? Yes. You got into grad school here. But I didn't come here for you. I came here with you. We built this life together. And I wouldn't change any of it. He paused, his gaze warm but firm. You didn't take me away from anything. My parents have always had a very specific idea of what family should look like. And I'm sorry they're putting this all on you. It's not fair to you. Or to us. His words settled over me. A soothing balm against the doubts that had been simmering inside me. And yet, I couldn't shake the sadness of it all. The realization that this choice we'd made together, a choice I thought would lead to unity, was instead creating a rift. I felt as if I were caught between two worlds. The one we were building here, filled with hope and excitement for our new family, and the one his mother seemed intent on pulling us back into. A world where family meant obligation and tradition above all else. Do you ever feel guilty? I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. For not being there with them? For not being the son they want you to be? Elliot looked thoughtful, his eyes drifting as he considered my question. Sometimes, maybe, he admitted, but not in the way you think. I feel guilty that they're unhappy. But not for choosing this life with you. They've always wanted me to be one thing. To live up to their expectations of what family looks like. But I can't live my life trying to meet their standards. I want to live by the standards we set together. His words grounded me, pulling me out of the guilt that had wrapped itself around me over the past few days. I realized that Elliot wasn't just choosing me. He was choosing the life we'd built. The future we were creating. And that included setting boundaries. Even with people who felt entitled to his time and presence. But, I hesitated, searching for the right words. I don't want to be the reason there's tension between you and your family. I don't want you to look back one day and feel like you lost something because of me. He smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair behind my ear. You're not the reason for anything except the life I want to live. And honestly, this isn't about us. This is about them and their refusal to accept that things change. Family doesn't mean a lack of boundaries, it means respecting them. And I know you've been doing everything you can to make things better. To build a bridge. But you can't force someone to cross it if they don't want to. Elliot's support made a world of difference. And I could feel the tension begin to ease. But a part of me still mourned the relationship I'd once hoped to have with his family. I had always imagined that becoming a parent would bring us closer. That the arrival of our daughter would somehow strengthen the bond between us and bring a new understanding of family. Instead, it felt as if the opposite had happened. The impending arrival of our daughter had magnified our differences. Exposed the expectations his family held that I simply couldn't meet. Over the next few days, messages began to trickle in from his family, small reminders of their disapproval. Subtle yet pointed. His mother sent photos of Thanksgiving gatherings from years past. The table set with familiar dishes. Surrounded by people who would be missing him this year. An aunt texted, mentioning how strange it would feel not to have everyone there. As though his absence were an unspoken tragedy. These messages stirred up the same guilt and doubt I'd been wrestling with. Even as I tried to remind myself that we had made the right choice. One evening, Elliot noticed my quietness as I scrolled through one of the messages. He placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me with his presence. They're just trying to get in your head. He said gently, this is what they do. They make you feel like you're missing out. Like you're wrong for setting boundaries. But we're here together for a reason. And we'll make new memories. New traditions. I wanted to believe him. But the memories his family shared cast a shadow. Making me question if we were losing something irreplaceable by staying away. Yet, as I looked around our home. At the baby's crib tucked into the corner. At the little outfits I'd carefully folded and put away. I knew this was where I belonged. This was the life we had chosen. And these were the memories we would hold onto. Even if they didn't match what his family expected. Thanksgiving finally arrived. And as Elliot and I spent the morning preparing a simple meal. A quiet peace settled over us. There were no flights. No strained conversations. No one to appease but each other. We ate dinner together. Just the two of us. And as we shared stories and laughter. I felt a profound gratitude for this small moment. A glimpse of the life we were building. It wasn't about grand traditions or elaborate gatherings, it was about the quiet, genuine connection we shared, the strength of our partnership as we prepared to welcome our daughter. Later that night, as we settled into bed, Elliot took my hand and looked at me with a quiet intensity. This is where we're meant to be, he said, as if reading my mind. And I'm glad we're here together. In that moment, I realized that while the guilt and tension might linger, they didn't define us. We were creating something new. Something ours. And even though it came with its share of challenges, it was worth every difficult conversation. Every boundary we had set. This was our family. And for the first time, I felt ready to let go of the weight I'd been carrying. As I drifted to sleep that night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. I knew the path forward wouldn't always be easy. That his family's expectations would continue to tug at us. But in the quiet stillness of that Thanksgiving evening, I understood that our choices were building the foundation for the family we wanted to become. And I knew that, no matter what came next, we would face it together. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a mix of excitement and unease. I woke early, lying in bed beside Elliot, savoring the quiet moment before the day truly began. It was surreal to realize that, for the first time in our marriage, we weren't spending the holiday in the familiar whirlwind of airport terminals or last-minute packing. Instead, we were right where we wanted to be, just the two of us in our own home. I tried to focus on the gratitude I felt for this calm, for the simplicity of a holiday without external demands. But beneath the surface, I could still feel the lingering tension, the quiet pressure that had settled over us like a cloud. As I made my way to the kitchen to start breakfast, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my mother-in-law. A photo of their Thanksgiving table already in the early stages of preparation. Each place meticulously set, with a small note underneath, "It's not the same without you here." I felt a pang of guilt, familiar and sharp, settling uncomfortably in my chest. It was a simple message, but it carried with it all the unspoken weight of her disappointment. The lingering hurt that our absence had created. I knew she was trying to make me feel included, but I couldn't ignore the underlying reminder that we weren't there. That by staying home we'd broken a tradition they held dear. I put my phone down, telling myself that I didn't need to carry this guilt today, that I needed to focus on our own celebration. Elliot came into the kitchen, greeting me with a warm hug. "Good morning," he said, a gentle smile on his face as he looked around at the ingredients I'd laid out for our small, simple Thanksgiving meal. "Ready for our first holiday at home?" I nodded, trying to match his cheerfulness. "Absolutely," I replied, though the unease still lingered. "It'll be nice to have a quiet day. Just us. No rushing. No airports." He squeezed my hand, seeming to understand the subtext behind my words. "You don't need to worry about them today," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Today is about us." With that, I tried to let go of the guilt, throwing myself into the preparation of our meal. Each small task a quiet reminder that this day belonged to us. We didn't need the elaborate holiday spreads or crowded tables. Instead, we roasted a small turkey, mashed a modest bowl of potatoes, and set out a few favorite sides. It was simple and cozy, a reflection of the life we had built and the family we were about to expand. But as we moved through the day, I couldn't completely shake the messages that continued to come in from Elliot's family. Photos, videos, little messages telling us how much we were missed. I knew they meant well, that they were trying to share the holiday with us from afar. But each new message felt like a reminder of the expectations we were defying. A nudge toward the life they believed Elliot should be living. One message, from his aunt, stood out in particular. It was a photo of the whole family gathered around the table, their hands joined in a pre-dinner prayer. Underneath, she'd written, "Feels strange without everyone here. Family traditions just aren't the same when we're not together." I felt the guilt return, a fresh wave of unease settling over me. I knew they missed him. I knew this day wasn't easy for them either. But they didn't seem to understand that Elliot and I were trying to establish our own traditions. That our staying home wasn't a rejection of them but rather a necessary step in building something new. I wanted to believe that they would come to see it in time. That as our family grew, they would accept the boundaries we were setting. But for now, it felt like every choice we made for ourselves was being viewed as an act of defiance. Elliot must have sensed my mood, because he gently took my hand and led me to the couch, encouraging me to sit down. "It's okay to feel torn," he said, his voice soft, "but you're allowed to want this time for us. For our family. It doesn't mean we love them any less." His words were a balm, easing the tightness in my chest. I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for his understanding. "It's just, I know they're hurting, and I can't help but feel like I'm the one causing it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Elliot shook his head. "No, you're not causing it. They're feeling something they have to work through. Just like we're building something here. They may not understand it now, but it's important." and they'll learn to adjust. As the day wore on, we continued to get messages and photos, each one a subtle reminder of the family we were missing, the people who were waiting for us to return. But instead of letting it overwhelm me, I decided to focus on the quiet joy of our own celebration. I watched as Elliot carefully carved the turkey, his face a mixture of concentration and amusement as he navigated our small kitchen, turning the simple meal into a quiet labor of love. Later, as we sat down to eat, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the elaborate, bustling Thanksgiving I had grown up with, but it was enough. I looked around our home, at the little signs of our impending parenthood, our daughter's crib, her tiny clothes folded neatly in a drawer, the soft, warm blankets we'd bought to wrap her in, and I realized that this was what mattered. This was the family we were creating, the life we were building, and it was okay to let it look different from what others expected. After dinner, as we relaxed on the couch, my phone buzzed again. It was a final message from Elliot's mother, a simple text that read, "Happy Thanksgiving, even if you're far away. We miss you." The message was bittersweet, a reminder of both the love they felt for him and the unspoken disappointment they carried. I showed it to Elliot, feeling a small pang of sadness that they couldn't see our decision for what it was, a choice we'd made not out of spite or selfishness, but out of love and a desire to create a foundation for our own family. Elliot took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "They'll understand one day," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "This is where I'm meant to be. With you. And we'll make them see that." Eventually, as the evening faded into night, I felt a quiet acceptance settle over me. I couldn't change how his family felt or the disappointment they carried, but I could control how I chose to interpret their words, how I allowed myself to carry them. I understood now that our choice to stay home was a necessary step, a way of establishing the life we wanted for ourselves and for our daughter. And while it might take time, I hoped that eventually, they would see it for what it truly was, a reflection of love, of commitment, and of the family we were becoming. That Thanksgiving night, as I lay in bed beside Elliot, I felt a calm I hadn't expected. I realized that family wasn't defined by traditions or proximity but by the choices we made for each other, by the support and love we extended even when it didn't align with what others expected. And in the quiet darkness, I understood that we were carving out something beautiful, something uniquely ours, and that was enough. Thanksgiving morning brought a rare, peaceful quiet to our home, the kind of stillness that, on any other holiday, would have felt foreign and unsettling. This year, though, it felt like a comfort. I took my time with the little details of the day, making coffee, setting out ingredients, and savoring the freedom to move slowly, to linger over each task without the rush of packing or flights. It was exactly the kind of quiet holiday I'd hoped for. As I set the table for our modest Thanksgiving meal, I found myself feeling a familiar mixture of emotions. There was a deep contentment in knowing that this was ours, that we were choosing to spend this time preparing for our baby, embracing our new roles as parents. But there was also a loneliness to it, a faint, dull ache at the thought of all the family gatherings happening without us. I couldn't ignore the feeling of isolation that settled in, the knowledge that for the first time, we weren't part of the big Thanksgiving crowd, the bustling house filled with noise, laughter, and familiar faces. Elliot noticed my quietness as he joined me at the table. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "It feels different, doesn't it?" he asked, his voice soft and knowing. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "It does," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I'd feel this way. I thought I'd just feel relief, that I'd be happy to be here with you. And I am," I added quickly, "but I also feel separate, like we're cut off from everyone else." He nodded, his hand gently rubbing my back. "It's okay to feel that way. We've spent years celebrating with everyone, and suddenly, we're doing something different. It's bound to feel strange." We sat down to eat, our conversation easy and comforting, but the weight of the family we weren't with lingered at the edges of my mind. I wanted to focus on the joy of being with Elliot, on the little traditions we were creating together, but it was hard to shake the awareness that everyone else was gathered without us. That they were carrying on the holiday without the slightest disruption. As if our absence barely made a ripple. I couldn't help but wonder what they were saying about us. What they thought of our choice to stay home. After dinner, as we cleaned up, my phone buzzed again. A message from Elliot's mother. A final attempt to reach out. This time, it was a simple text. We miss you here. It's strange without you both. I hope you know that. I read the message a few times, feeling the mix of love and disappointment in her words. She hadn't sent any guilt-laden photos or calls this time. Just a simple statement, but it held more weight than any of her previous messages. Her words were a reminder of the distance that now stretched between us. A distance that felt both chosen and inevitable. I showed the message to Elliot, my eyes searching his face for reassurance. Do you think they understand? I asked, the vulnerability clear in my voice. Or do you think they just think we're abandoning them? He looked thoughtful, taking a deep breath before answering. I think they miss us. And I think they're struggling to understand why we chose this. But that doesn't mean they're right or that we've done anything wrong. It just means it's going to take time. I nodded, letting his words sink in. The ache of isolation remained. But I realized that, for now, this was simply part of the process of establishing our own family. It was painful, feeling as though we were standing at a distance from the life we'd once known. But I understood that this distance was necessary if we were going to build something truly ours. After cleaning up, Elliot and I settled on the couch, sharing the last slice of pie. I leaned into him, letting his warmth ground me. As we sat there, I could feel the weight of the day begin to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I knew that, despite the sadness and the loneliness, we had done what was right for us. We had chosen each other. Chosen to create a space for our daughter. To give her a holiday rooted in love and calm rather than obligation and tension. As the evening grew darker, I found myself reflecting on what this holiday would mean for us in the years to come. This year's Thanksgiving had been both difficult and beautiful in its own way. A mixture of longing and gratitude, sadness and peace, and yet, I felt a renewed strength in the life we were creating. A confidence that the boundaries we were setting now would give our family room to grow and thrive. Lying in bed that night, I felt the baby kick, a gentle reminder that soon, our family would no longer be just the two of us. I reached for Elliot's hand, placing it on my belly, and we stayed like that, quiet and connected. The ache of being apart from everyone else lingered, but it was softened by the knowledge that this was exactly where we were meant to be. Together, building something new and entirely our own. In that moment, I knew that this Thanksgiving was the beginning of a shift. A gradual redefinition of family and tradition that would take time and patience. And though it was isolating at times, I was ready to embrace the changes, knowing that we were laying the foundation for a future that held more love and peace than I could have imagined. The week after Thanksgiving passed in a blur of preparations and quiet moments, filled with a heightened sense of anticipation. Each day, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as I realized we were closer than ever to meeting our daughter. The tension from Thanksgiving had faded somewhat, replaced by a deep, calm focus on the life we were about to bring into the world. Every little kick, every movement reminded me that our family was on the brink of something new. Something bigger than all the complexities that had weighed us down. Then, one night, just a few days after Thanksgiving, it happened. I woke up to a sharp pain. An unmistakable sensation that sent a jolt of both fear and exhilaration through me. I reached for Elliot's hand in the dark, whispering his name, and felt his reassuring presence come to life beside me as he registered what was happening. The hours that followed were a whirlwind. We grabbed our bags, made our way to the hospital, and braced ourselves for the life-changing hours ahead. Everything else, the strained conversations, the holiday, the family tension, melted away, leaving only the two of us, focused on bringing our daughter safely into the world. Our daughter arrived early in the morning, tiny and perfect. Holding her in my arms for the first time felt surreal, like the culmination of every dream, every difficult moment, every choice that had led us here. As I looked down at her, I felt a fierce, overwhelming love surge through me, a sense of completeness and clarity I hadn't known was possible. This was our family, right here, and in that moment, I knew I had everything I needed. Elliot was by my side. His face filled with awe and tenderness as he held her for the first time. I could see in his eyes the same sense of realization. The understanding that everything we had fought for, every boundary we had set, had led us to this moment. Together, we were a family in a way that felt both simple and profound. A truth that needed no explanation or justification. The first calls we made were to our parents, sharing the news that our daughter had arrived. I could hear the emotion in my mother's voice, her joy and relief, and I knew she would be on the next flight out. Elliot's parents were ecstatic as well, their voices filled with a mixture of love and longing. His mother sounded especially happy, although there was a trace of sadness too, a subtle, unspoken sense that she wished she could have been there. I could feel it in her words. A bittersweetness that reminded me of all the unfulfilled expectations, the distance that had shaped our relationship over the past few years. The flood of calls and messages from family followed, each one filled with congratulations and love, as if the arrival of our daughter had finally bridged the gap that had grown between us and his family. For a moment, I let myself hope that this shared joy, this unifying moment, could soften the resentment they'd held, that perhaps they would finally see us as a family of our own, not just an extension of theirs. In the days that followed, Elliot and I settled into the rhythm of new parenthood, each day filled with quiet wonder and exhaustion. There were moments where everything felt surreal, where I would look at our daughter sleeping in her crib and feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude and peace. This was the family we had chosen to create, the life we had fought to protect. And now it was here, real and tangible in the form of this tiny human who depended on us entirely. Elliot's parents called frequently, their voices filled with pride and excitement as they asked for updates and photos. They sent gifts, a delicate baby blanket, tiny clothes, a handwritten note from his mother that read, "I wish we could be there, but thank you for sharing her with us." It was a small gesture, but it felt like an olive branch, an acknowledgement of the life we had chosen to build together. But even amid the joy, I could sense the subtle undercurrent of regret in their words. The quiet implication that, had things been different, they would have been part of this experience in person. While there was no overt pressure, no demands, I could feel their disappointment, their hope that we would soon make plans to visit. It was an unspoken reminder that the tension between us wasn't fully resolved, that there would always be a balance to navigate, a line to walk between the family we were creating and the family that had been left behind. One evening, as I held our daughter close, I shared my thoughts with Elliot, letting him know about the hints of sadness I sensed in his mother's messages. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I asked, my voice filled with a quiet vulnerability. "That we're not trying to shut them out, that we're just trying to build this life in a way that works for us?" Elliot sighed, thoughtful as he considered my question. "I think they will. Eventually," he replied. "It might take time, and they may never see things exactly as we do. But I believe they'll come to accept it. This is where we are now. And this," he added, looking down at our daughter, "this is what matters." His words gave me comfort. A reminder that family isn't always simple or easy, but that our choices were rooted in love, in the commitment we'd made to each other and to our daughter. The boundaries we'd set weren't meant to exclude anyone, they were meant to protect what we held dear. To create a life that allowed us to grow together without the weight of expectations we couldn't meet. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing more at peace with our decision to stay home, to honor our own needs. Each new day with our daughter reinforced the strength of the family we had created, the foundation we were building together. There were still moments of sadness, times when I wondered if things might have been easier had we lived closer. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the joy and contentment I felt in our little family. I knew there would be more conversations with his family, more times when our choices might be questioned or misunderstood. But I felt a newfound strength in knowing that we could navigate those moments together, that we could face whatever came our way with the same quiet resolve that had carried us through the challenges of this past year. And as I watched our daughter grow, her tiny fingers wrapped around Elliot's hand, I knew that we had made the right choice. We had chosen each other, chosen to put our family first. And in that choice, we had found a sense of peace and purpose that no amount of outside expectations could shake. This was our family, and while it might not look like what everyone else envisioned, it was enough. It was everything. And in that realization, I felt a quiet, enduring strength, ready to carry us forward into the life we were creating, one loving moment at a time. In the quiet weeks after our daughter's birth, life settled into a new rhythm. Our days were filled with feedings, gentle lullabies, and the soft, sleepy sounds of a newborn discovering the world. It was a delicate time, where each moment felt more precious and fleeting than the last. I found myself savoring the small things, the warmth of her tiny hand curled around my finger, the peaceful weight of her asleep on my chest, the way Elliot would look at her with awe, his expression filled with a love that deepened every day. In these quiet, early moments of parenthood, I felt a renewed sense of clarity. Becoming a mother brought me to a place of understanding that transcended the old expectations and judgments we'd struggled with for so long. I realized that, while family can be a beautiful source of support and love, it can also bring pressure and expectations that may not fit the life we want to build. Our decision to prioritize our own little family, to create boundaries that felt true to us, was not a rejection of the love and tradition his family represented. It was a necessary shift to allow us to thrive on our own terms. Elliot's family continued to reach out, their messages warm and filled with questions about the baby. They were respectful, even if I could still sense the longing in their words. The subtle hints that they hoped for a visit soon. They asked about her every little milestone, her sleeping patterns, her first coos and gurgles, showing their love from afar. And while we weren't able to share these moments with them in person, I found that their support and enthusiasm gave me a new perspective. Perhaps, I thought, they were coming to understand us a bit more, to see that our love for them remained, even if it looked different now. One afternoon, as I sat with Elliot, watching our daughter nap, I turned to him, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. I think I've finally made peace with the way things are, I said softly, almost as much to myself as to him. It took a long time, but I understand now that we're allowed to set our own path. That family doesn't mean sacrificing our own needs to meet everyone else's expectations. He smiled, taking my hand, a gentle reassurance that he felt the same way. We've been through a lot to get here, but I'm proud of what we've built. He replied, and I know my parents will come around. It's just a different pace for them. They may not fully understand, but I think they'll respect us for it eventually. The strength I'd found in setting boundaries with his family wasn't just about the physical distance or the decision to stay home for Thanksgiving. It was about letting go of the guilt that had plagued me for so long. I was learning to embrace that it was okay to want something different. That putting my family's needs first didn't make me selfish. It simply made me a mother, a wife, someone committed to protecting the life we were building. Over time, Elliot's parents softened. His mother even called one evening, her tone more understanding than it had ever been. She told me how grateful she was to know that Elliot was happy, that he was where he wanted to be, and that she looked forward to meeting her granddaughter whenever the time was right. It was a conversation I hadn't anticipated, one filled with quiet acceptance, as if she had finally come to terms with the changes that had once felt like losses. As the months went on, I felt the weight of our decisions lighten, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. We were free to shape our own family traditions, to create memories that reflected our values and our love. I found joy in the small moments we shared. Our first Christmas with our daughter. Just the three of us, wrapped in warmth and laughter. The nights Elliot and I would sit up late, talking about our hopes for her, our dreams for the future. These new traditions became the foundation of our family, a reminder that we had made the right choices, even when they'd felt difficult. I knew that we would continue to navigate family dynamics as our daughter grew. But I also knew that we would do it together, with respect for ourselves and our loved ones. Looking back, I realized that setting these boundaries hadn't distanced us from Elliot's family, rather, it had allowed us to welcome them into our lives in a way that felt authentic. Without compromising who we were, we could cherish their presence while also honoring the life we wanted to live. We could be both a part of their family and a family of our own. In those quiet moments with my daughter, her tiny breaths filling the room, I felt a deep gratitude for everything we had overcome. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, Times when our choices might be questioned. When our path would diverge from what others wanted or expected. But I also knew that we had the strength to face those moments together. That we were building a foundation of love and resilience that would carry us through whatever lay ahead. This was our family, crafted with intention and care. A life that was beautifully ours. And in embracing that truth, I found a peace that no amount of outside expectation could ever take away.